ever noticed that you have a hip that likes to shift off to the side or hike up in a squat or a lunge? Well, one reason can be due to the inability to sit back equally into each side of your pelvis. This can not only affect what's happening in your hips, but can also affect what's happening in your core and your pelvic floor, such as leaking or a bulging sensation. So come join me as we explore how well you shift into each side of your hips. We want our pelvis to be able to shift off of one side and onto the other. This allows for one side of the pelvis to move independently from the other, for equal movement in the back side of the hips on each side, and for the sacrum to move independently from the ilium. If you can't fully shift onto one side or the other, or that both sides aren't opening equally, our bodies can get creative to make that action happen. This might look like a full shift in orientation, such as always being rotated in one direction, a hip that is hiked up, or laterally shifted off to the side. That change of orientation and limited movement will not only affect the position and muscles that attach to the pelvis, such as your glutes and your adductors, but also what's happening in your pelvic floor and core. It can not only affect the sticky side, but also what's happening on the other side. I've had people who have complaints on one side of their hips to then realize that it's actually what's happening or not happening on the other side to be a driving factor to their symptoms. I love this exercise for positionally assessing and addressing how well we shift onto one side and another in isolation. It's also a great way to address gripping by using gravity and relaxation to help the tissue learn how to let go. So let's go ahead and dive in. So we're going to set up here in a 90-90 position with your legs completely supported on a chair. It's important to try as best you can to get your knees right over your hips, because that's going to help use your femur and gravity to help you shift back into the hip that is not elevated. I'm going to use a yoga block here, and I'm going to lift up and put my right butt cheek up onto that yoga block and then kind of shift my hips off to the left. This is going to provide some release in that right posterior hip by peeling the muscle away from the sacrum. But then now, more importantly, we're going to work on sitting back into that left hip and feeling how this pelvis is now rotated towards the left. We're watching that those knees stay pointed straight up and down to get that relative movement in one side from the other, rather than having your knees shift off to the side with your pelvis. So as I'm here, then I just get to relax. I'm going to inhale into my back and sides and between my sit bones. And then exhale and relax and feel that left hip get a little bit heavier, that femur sink back into the socket, and that left pelvis shift down into the ground a little bit more. And you're just going to hold here for a minute or two, depending on what you need. So at first, you might notice that that left hip is maybe a little bit suspended. Let me go ahead and show you as I'm doing it on the other side. So if I go to now elevate my left hip, and I sit back into this right hip, what might happen at first is that that non-elevated hip is now just kind of levitating in the air. That can really highlight that you're having some stickiness and tightness in the backside of the pelvis, and we're on to some good stuff. That being said, as you're here, if this hip is feeling like it can't trust the situation, then it's going to keep gripping. So this is where it can be helpful to either use something lower than a yoga block, or you can put a little bit of a cushion here and safety net underneath that right side of that pelvis to have the towel underneath it. So now that right hip feels supported and can let go and relax. So then I'm going to inhale again into my backside and hips between sit bones, and then exhale and feel how that right hip in this situation gets a little bit heavier onto the ground. So how we can use this as an assessment is seeing how well it feels to be able to sit back into one hip compared to the other. If one hip can go down, no problem, great. And then you go to the other side and it's like, ooh, that's levitated a little bit more. That can tell you that maybe you need to spend a little bit more time opening up the back side of that hip and pelvis to help set you up for more balanced movements when we go into upright activities. Now remember, we're looking for this relative movement between one side and the other. So if my right hip is elevated here and I'm allowing that left hip to sink down, if it's feeling sticky, sometimes our bodies can get creative and arch our back to try to get there, which we don't want. So really paying attention that that back is feeling nice and heavy and relaxed as you're going into that shift. If you're also noticing that you're holding a lot of tension in your legs to try to keep your femurs parallel to each other, it can be helpful to use an armrest to kind of block your knee to help it stay upright and allow you to just focus on relaxing and letting go while getting into that position. Now, make sure to check out some of our other helpful videos here that we have that explore some of this idea in more dynamic movement, as well as some release work and other positional releases to help get things to let go and improve the function of your hips and pelvis. If you found this content useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a comment below. That helps let us know that we want to continue to make more information like this and help answer whatever other questions you have. If you're a movement or fitness professional, don't forget to check out some of our continuing education courses that we have to offer to dive into some topics like this even further.